Hello again. Back in the office, and I am ready to read. Let's see, we're reading No Time to Spare by Ursula K LeGuin. I love how I still have to look at the cover every time I open this book. If I'm able to finish this book, I think this will be the first non-picture book, non-audio book that I finished front to back in years. I've read many starts of books, but I haven't finished a whole book in a really long time. So, let's do it. Okay, we are on The Inner Child and the Nude Politician, October 2014. Last summer, a company that makes literary t-shirts asked me for permission to use a quote. The creative adult is the child who survived. I looked at the sentence and thought, did I write that sentence? I think I wrote something like it, but I hope not that sentence. Creative is not a word I use much since it was taken over by a corporation thing. And isn't any adult a child who survived? So I googled the sentence. I got lots of hits, and boy, were some of them weird. In many of them, the sentence is ascribed to me, but no reference to a source is ever given. The weirdest one is a site called quotes-clothing.com. My dear, the creative adult is the child who survived. The creative adult is the child who survived after the world tried killing them, making them grown up. The creative adult is the child who survived the blandness of schooling, the unhelpful words of bad teachers, and the naysaying ways of the world. The creative adult is, in essence, simply that, a child. Falsely yours, Ursula K LeGuin. The oddest part of this little orgy of self-pity is falsely yours, which I take to be a coy semi-confession of forgery by whoever actually wrote the rant. I've looked through my own essays for the sentence that could have been used or misused for the quote, because I still have a feeling there is one. So far, I haven't found it. I asked my friends in an SF chat group if it rang any bell with them. Some of them being scholars with a keen nose for provenience, but none of them could help. If anybody reading this has a theory about the origin of the pseudo-quote, or better yet, a eureka with volume and page citation, would you please post it as a response at BBC, because it's been bothering me ever since June. The sentence itself, its use and popularity, bothers me even more. Indifference to what words actually say. Oh, hold on. She says, because it's been bothering me ever since June, and then there's an asterisk. Welcome responses to this blog post on Bookview Cafe soon gave me both the sentence I wrote and a possible source of the misquotation. In the 1974 essay, Why Are Americans Afraid of Dragons?, reprinted in the collection The Language of the Night, I wrote, I believe that maturity is not an outgrowing, but a growing up. That an adult is not a dead child, but a child who survived. Nothing about creativity, whatever. I was just hitting at the notion that maturity is mere loss or betrayal of childhood. The misquote may have first appeared on the internet in 1999 in a huge and generally useful collection of quotations compiled by Professor Julian F. Fleuron. When I wrote him, he was distressed to learn that it was a misquote and most amiably removed it at once. But a false attribution on the internet is like a box of elder beetles. The miserable little things just keep breeding and tweeting and crawling out of the woodwork. I checked just now, July 2016, Goodreads and AIGA continue to attribute the creative adult misquote to me, is also taken on an independent existence and is even referred to by one source as the well-known saying. Oh well. Okay. The sentence itself, its use and popularity bothers me even more. Indifference to what words actually say, willingness to accept a valid truism as a useful, even revelatory concept, carelessness about where a supposed quotation comes from, that's all part of what I like least about the internet. A blah blah blah, who cares information is what I want to be attitude. A lazy-mindedness that degrades both language and thought. But deeper than that lies my aversion to what the sentence says to me, that only the child is alive and creative, so that to grow up is to die. To respect and cherish the freshness of perception and the vast polymorphous potentialities of childhood is one thing, but to say that we experience true being only in childhood and that creativity is an infantile function, that's something else. I keep meeting this devaluation of growing up in fiction and also in the cult of the inner child. There's no end of books for children whose hero is a rebellious misfit, the boy or girl usually described as plain and almost predictably red-haired, who gets into trouble by questioning or resisting or ignoring the rules. Every young reader identifies with this kid, and rightly. In some respects, to some extent, children are victims of society. They have little or no power, they aren't given the chance to show what's in them, and they know it. They love reading about taking power, getting back at bullies, showing their stuff, getting justice. They want to do so that they can grow up, claim independence in order to take responsibility. But there's a literature written for both kids and adults in which human society is reduced to the opposition: kids good, creative, adults bad, dead inside. Here the child heroes are not only rebellious, but are in all ways superior to their hidebound, coercive society and the stupid, insensitive, mean-minded adults that surround them. They may find friendship with other children and understanding from a wise grandparently type of another skin color, or from people marginal to or outside their society. But they have nothing to learn from adults of their own people, and those elders have nothing to teach them. Such a child is always right and wiser than the adults who repress and misunderstand him. Yet the super-perceptive, wise child is helpless to escape. He is a victim. Holden Caulfield is a model of this child. Peter Pan is his direct ancestor. Tom Sawyer has something in common with this kid, and so does Huck Finn, but Tom and Huck are not sentimentalized or morally oversimplified, nor do they consent to be victims. They are described with and have a powerful sense of ironic humor, which affects the crucial issue of self-pity. The coddled Tom loves to see himself as cruelly oppressed by meaningless laws and obligations, but Huck, a real victim of personal and social abuse, has no self-pity at all. Both of them, however, fully intend to grow up, to take charge of their own lives, and they will. Tom, no doubt, as a successful pillar of his society, Huck a freer man out there in the territories. It seems to me the super-perceptive child victim of self-pity has something in common with the inner child. They're lazy. It's so much easier to blame the grown-ups than to be one. The idea that we all contain an inner child who has been suppressed by our society, the belief that we should cultivate this inner child as our true self and that we can depend upon it to release our creativity, seems an over-reduction statement of an insight expressed by many wise and thoughtful people, among them Jesus. Except ye be converted and become as little children, ye shall not enter the kingdom of heaven. Some mystics and many great artists, aware of drawing on their childhood as a deep source of inspiration, have spoken of the need to maintain an unbroken interconnection between the child and the adult in one's own inward life. but to reduce this to the idea that we can open a mental door from which our imprisoned inner child will pop out and teach us how to sing, dance, paint, think, pray, cook, love, etc. A very wonderful statement of the necessity and the difficulty of maintaining a connection to one's own child self is Wordsworth's Ode on Imitations of Immortality. The poem offers a profoundly felt, profoundly thoughtful, radical argument. Our birth is but a sleep and a forgetting. Instead of seeing birth as an awakening from blank non-being and fetal incompletion into the child's fullness of being, and seeing maturity as a narrowing, impoverishing journey toward blank death, the ode proposes that a soul enters life forgetting its eternal being, can remember it throughout life only in intimations and moments of revelation, and will recall and rejoin in it fully only in death. Nature, says Wordsworth, offers us endless reminders of the eternal, and we are most open to them in our childhood. Though we lose that openness in adult life when custom lies upon us with a weight heavy as frost and deep almost as life, still we can keep faith with those shadowy recollections which be they what they may, and yet the fountain light of all our day, and yet a master light of all our seeing, uphold us, cherish, and have power to make our noisy years seem moments in the being of the eternal silence, truths that wake to perish never. I cherish this testimony particularly because it need not be seen as rising from the belief system of any religion. Believer and freethinker can share this vision of human existence passing from light through darkness into light, from mystery to endless mystery. In this sense, the innocence, the unjudging, unqualified openness to experience of the young child can be seen as a spiritual quality attainable or reattainable by the adult. And I think this is what the idea of the inner child originally or optimally is all about. But Wordsworth makes no sentimental plea to us to nourish the child we were by denying the value of maturity or by trying to be a child again. However conscious we are of the freedom and awareness and joyfulness we lose as we age, we live a full human life, not by stopping at any stage, but by becoming all that is in us to become. Though nothing can bring back the hour of splendor in the grass, of glory in the flower, we will grieve not, rather find strength in what remains behind, in the primal sympathy, which having been must ever be, in the soothing thoughts that spring out of human suffering, in the faith that looks through death, in years that bring the philosophic mind. If, like me, you look at the word soothing in surprise, wondering how thoughts of human suffering can be soothing, perhaps you will feel, as I do, that such wonder is a key, a sign that the poet's direct language contains immensely more than its apparent clarity reveals at first, that nothing he says in this poem is simple, and that though it's easily understood, any understanding of it may lead on, if followed, to further understanding. The cult of the inner child tends to oversimplify what Wordsworth leaves complex, close off what he leaves open, and make opposition where there are none. The child is good, therefore the adult is bad. Being a kid is great, so growing up is the pits. Sure enough, growing up isn't easy. As soon as they can toddle, babies are bound to toddle into trouble. Wordsworth had no illusions about that. Shades of the prison house begin to close upon the growing boy. The transition to adulthood, adolescence, is difficult and dangerous, recognized as such by many cultures. All too often, in punitive ways such as cruel male initiation rites or the brutal eradication of adolescents and girls by marrying them off as soon as they menstruate. I see children as unfinished beings who have been given a very large job to do. Their job is to become complete, to fulfill their potential, to grow up. Most of them want to do this job and try their level best to do it. All of them need adult help in doing it. This help is called teaching. Teaching can, of course, go wrong, be restrictive, not educative, be stultifying, cruel. Everything we do can be wrong. But to dismiss teaching as a mere repression of childish spontaneity is a monstrous injustice to every patient parent and teacher in the world since the old Stone Age, and denies both children's rights to grow up and their elders' responsibility to help them do so. Children are by nature, by necessity, irresponsible, and irresponsibility in them, as in puppies or kittens, is part of their charm. Carried into adulthood, it becomes a dire practical and ethical failing. Uncontrolled spontaneity wastes itself. Ignorance isn't wisdom. Innocence is wisdom only of the spirit. We can and do all learn from children all through our life, but become as little children is a spiritual counsel, not an intellectual, practical, or ethical one. In order to see that our employers have no clothes on, do we really have to wait for a child to say so? Or even worse, wait for somebody's inner brat to pipe up? If so, we're in for a lot of nude politicians. A modest proposal. Vague empathy. Vegeempathy. June 2012. It is time for humanity to ascend from our primitive condition as omnivores, carnivores, vegetarians, and vegans. We must take the inevitable next step to organism, the way of the herbivore, leading away from obesity, allergy, and cruelty towards blameless purity. Our motto must be, all we need is O. Many people troubled by the suffering of animals who would scarcely exist outside zoos if we did not breed them for their meat, milk, and eggs, remain strangely indifferent to the endless, enormous ordeal of the vegetables we keep in captivity or capture wild. Consider for one moment what plants undergo at our hands. We breed them with ruthless selectivity, harass, torment, and poison them, crowd them into vast monocultures, caring for their well-being only as it affects our desires, raising many merely for their byproducts, such as seed, flower, or fruit, and we slaughter them without a thought of their suffering when harvested, uprooted, torn living from their earth, or branched, slashed, chopped, mown, ripped to pieces, or when cooked, dropped to die in boiling water or oil, or even, or worst of all, eaten raw, stuffed into a human mouth and masticated by human teeth and swallowed often while alive. Do you think a bean is dead because you bought it at the store in a plastic bag? That a carrot is dead because it's been in the refrigerator for a while? Have you ever planted a few of those beans in damp earth and waited a week or two, put the carrot top in a saucer of fresh water and waited a week or two? The life in a plant may be less visible, but far more intense and durable than the life in an animal. If you put an oyster in a saucer of fresh water and keep it for a week, the result will be quite different. Why then, if it is immoral to subject an oyster to degradation of becoming food, is it blameless, even virtuous, to do the same thing to a carrot or a piece of tofu? Because the carrot doesn't suffer, says the vegan. Soybeans have no nervous system, they don't feel pain, plants have no feelings. That is exactly what many people said about animals for millennia, and what many still say about fish. As science has brought some of us back to an awareness of our animality, we have been forced to acknowledge that all higher animals suffer pain and fear at least as intensely as we do. But just as we once misused science to support the claim that animals are mindless machines, we now misuse science to support the claim of knowing that non-animal living beings, plants, have no feelings. We know nothing of the sort. Science has only just begun to investigate plant sensitivity and plant communication. The results are still meager, but positive, fascinating, and strange. The mechanisms and processes, being so very different from the senses and nervous systems of animals, are barely understood. But so far, what science has to say on the subject fails to justify the convenient belief that plants are insensate. We don't know what the carrot feels. In fact, we don't know what the oyster feels. We can't ask the cow's opinion on being milked, although we can hypothesize that if her udder was full, she might feel relief. The assumptions we make about all other living creatures are mostly self-serving, and perhaps the most deeply entrenched of them is that plants are insensate, irrational, and dumb, thus inferior to animals, here for our use. This snap judgment allows even the most tender-hearted of us to disrespect plants, to kill vegetables without mercy, to congratulate ourselves on the purity of our conscience, while in the very act of callously devouring a young kale stalk or a tender, delicate, curling, living infant pea tendril. I believe the only way to avoid such cruel hypocrisy and achieve true clarity of conscience is by becoming an Ogun. It is a pity that the Ogun movement, by its nature and principles, is fated to be, in each individual case, rather short-lived. But surely the first martyrs of the cause will inspire multitudes to follow them and forswearing the grossly unnatural practice of supporting life by eating other living beings or their byproducts. Oguns, ingesting only the unsullied purity of the O in the atmosphere and the H2O, will live in true amity with all animals and all vegetables, and will proudly preach their creed for as long as they possibly can. It could be for several weeks sometimes. Okay, I'm going to read one more. Belief in belief. February 2014. You can buy rocks in which are carved words intended to be inspiring. Love, hope, dream, etc. Some have the word believe. They puzzle me. Is belief a virtue? Is it desirable in itself? Does it not matter what you believe as long as you believe something? If I believe that horses turned into artichokes on Tuesdays, would that be better than doubting it? Charles Blow had a fine editorial in the New York Times on January 3, 2014, indoctrinating religious warriors, indicating the radical Republicans' use of religion to confuse opinion on matters of fact and their success in doing so. He used a Pew report from December 30, 2013 to provide this disheartening statistic. Last year, the percentage of Democrats who believed in evolution inched up to 67%. The percentage of Republicans believing so plummeted to 43%. Now, more Republicans believe that humans and other living things have existed in their present form since the beginning of time than believe in evolution. Now, greatly as I respect Charles Blow's keen intelligence and reliable compassion, his choice of words here worries me. 4 times in this paragraph he uses the verb believe in a way that implies that the credibility of a scientific theory and the credibility of a religious scripture are comparable. I don't think they are. And I want to write about it because I agree with him that issues of factual plausibility and spiritual belief or faith are being, cynically or innocently, confused and need to be disentangled. I wasn't able to find the exact wording of the questions asked in the Pew survey. Their report uses the words think more often than believe. People think that human and other beings have evolved over time or reject the idea. This language reassures me somewhat, for if a poll taker asked me, do you believe in evolution? My answer would have been no. I ought to refuse to answer at all, of course, because a meaningless question has only meaningless answers. Asking me if I believe in evolution and change makes about as much sense as asking if I believe in Tuesdays or artichokes. The word evolution means change, something turning into something else. It happens all the time. The problem here is our use of the word evolution to signify the theory of evolution. The shorthand causes a mental short circuit. It sets up a false parallel between a hypothesis concerning observed fact and a revelation from God as recorded in the Hebrew Bible, which is then reinforced by our loose use of the word believe. I don't believe in Darwin's theory of evolution. I accept it. It isn't a matter of faith, but of evidence. The whole undertaking of science is to deal as well as it can with reality. The reality of actual things and events in time is subject to doubt, to hypothesis, to proof and disproof, to acceptance and rejection, not to belief or disbelief. Belief has its proper and powerful existence in the domains of magic, religion, fear, and hope. I see no opposition between accepting the theory of evolution and believing in God. The intellectual acceptance of a scientific theory and the belief in a transcendent deity have little or no overlap. Neither can support or contradict the other. They rise from profoundly different ways of looking at the same world, different ways of coming at reality, the material and the spiritual. They can and often do coexist in perfect harmony. Extreme literalism in reading religious texts makes any kind of thinking hard. Still, even if one believes that God created the universe in 6 days a few thousand years ago, one can take that as a spiritual truth unaffected by the material evidence that the universe is billions of years old, and vice versa. As Galileo knew, though the inquisitors didn't, whether the earth goes round the sun or the sun goes round the earth doesn't affect one way or the other, the belief that God is the spiritual center of all. The idea that only belief sees the world as wonderful, and the cold hard facts of science take all the color and wonder out of it, the idea that scientific understanding automatically threatens and weakens religious or spiritual insight, is just hokum. Some of the hokum arises from professional jealousy, rivalry, and fear. Priests and scientists competing for power and control of human minds. Atheist rant and fundamentalist rant rising alike, passionate, partial, false. My impression is that most working scientists, whether they practice a religion or not, accept the coexistence of religion, its primacy in its own sphere, and go on with what they're doing. But some scientists hate religion, fear it, and rail against it, and some priests and preachers, wanting their sphere of influence to include everything and everyone, claim the absolute primacy of biblical revelation over material fact. Thus, they both set a fatal trap for the believer. If you believe in God, you can't believe in evolution, and vice versa. This is rather like saying if you believe in Tuesday, you can't believe in artichokes. Maybe the problem is that believers can't believe that science doesn't involve belief, and so confusing knowledge with hypothesis, they fatally misunderstand what scientific knowledge is and isn't. A scientific hypothesis is a tentative assertion of knowledge based on the observation of reality and the collection of factual evidence supporting it. Assertions without factual content, beliefs, are simply irrelevant to it, and it's always subject to refutation. The only way to refute it is to come up with observed facts that disprove it. So far, evidence fully supports the hypothesis that creation has been changing since its origin, that on Earth living creatures adapting to change have evolved through eons from single-cell organisms through a vast profusion of species, and that they're still adapting and evolving right now, as can be seen in the evolution of finch species in the Galapagos, or moth coloration, or barred-spotted owl interbreeding, or 100 other examples. Yet to the strict scientific mind, the theory of evolution is not absolute knowledge. Exhaustively tested and supported by evidence as it is a theory. Further observation can always alter, improve, refine, or enlarge it. It's not dogma, it's not an article of faith, but a tool. Scientists use it, act on it, even defend it as if they believed in it. But they're not doing so because they take it on faith. They accept it and use it and defend it against irrelevant attack because it has so far withstood massive attempts at disproof and because it works. It does a necessary job. It explains things that needed explaining. It leads the mind on into new realms of factual discovery and theoretical imagination. Darwin's theory vastly enlarges our perception of reality, our always tentative knowledge. As far as we have tested it and can test it, and always subject to modification as we learn more, we can accept it as true knowledge. A great, rich, beautiful insight, not a revealed truth, but an earned one. In the realm of the spirit, it appears that we can't earn knowledge. We can only accept it as a gift, the gift of belief. Belief is a great word, and a believed truth, too, can be great and beautiful. It matters very greatly what one believes in. I wish we could stop using the word belief in matters of fact, leaving it where it belongs, in matters of religious faith and secular hope. I believe we'd avoid a lot of unnecessary pain if we did so. I'm going to wrap up now because my camera is almost full. We're on About Anger, page 136. Talk to you again soon.